Have you ever known anybody that has messed up so bad that you didn't think God could use that person? Have you ever had any failures in your life that you thought God couldn't use you in any way, shape, or form? Was there anything in your life that you thought you couldn't go to God? Today we're going to look at a person in the Old Testament that personifies someone who was actually a really bad guy. He was a sneak. He was a snake. He was greasy. He was a liar. He was a thief. He was a cheat. His name was Jacob. Was not a good guy at all. He was a manipulator. He was a conniver. He was a passive, aggressive, behind the scene, never giving up, sneaky guy that kept on going for what he wanted. Yet God used him. Not because he was good. God knows he didn't deserve it. But God had plans. Now, what do we get from his life? We're going to look into it. It's a really long story, but I'm just going to give you the cliff notes and some background on him. But this is not to say that we are all as bad as Jacob. Maybe some, but not all. But we do have failures in different areas in our lives. And when we look at the big picture of his life, how he started, where he went, but where he ended up, there is a lesson there for us. So, you remember last week we looked at Abraham. Abraham is known as the father of faith, right? And we only looked at the effect his compromises had when he first started walking with the Lord, and the warnings that we got from his life. Today we're going to look at his grandson, Jacob. Now, Abraham had the promised child, Isaac, right? And Isaac married Rebekah. They were a dysfunctional bunch. It was a dysfunctional family. Why? Just like Andrea read, his father liked the firstborn because he was a macho, muscular, outdoorsy type that liked to go hunting and sports and all that stuff. But his mother loved Jacob. He used to hang around in the kitchen. He didn't like to leave the house too much. He was smooth-skinned. So because of this, there was dysfunction in the family. Because of this, Jacob grew up in an environment where he was elevated by his mom, from which he learned manipulating, to be prideful, to be self-reliant, to be sneaky, to make deals covertly, to be passive-aggressive. But for whatever reason, God chose Jacob. He has his reasons. We don't know. He didn't choose Esau. So what happened is one day Esau comes in from a hunting trip. He couldn't catch anything. He's empty-handed. He was hunting all day. Probably got up early in the morning. It was probably by the evening now. He didn't eat anything. He's famished. He comes in. He walks into the kitchen. And he smells this chili being cooked. He says to his brother, Jacob, he says, "Can you give me a bowl of that chili?" His brother, being the sneaky opportunist, he said, "Sure, I'll give it to you if you give me your birthright." You know what the birthright is? Birthright was every son got an equal share of the father's inheritance. But the firstborn who had the birthright would get a double inheritance, and he would have been considered the leader after the father had passed away. So basically, he took his birthright from him. He says, "Okay, I'm going to die of hunger instead." I mean, obviously there were issues with Esau. He's not as pure as the wind-driven snow here. You know, obviously he didn't care about the birthright so much. I mean, he could have eaten something else. So sometimes we see why God chose Jacob. God saw the potential of Jacob, and he saw the potential of Esau. But regardless, it wasn't for Jacob to have the birthright. It was for Esau, but he took it from his brother. And then things get worse. After a little while, his father Isaac is really old. And the tradition back then was, right before they died, they didn't have their last will and testament written down. They would give it as a blessing. When the father was feeling like he was ready to go, he would call his children and he would bless them. With his blessings, he would give them whatever he was leaving them. So Isaac thought he was about to die. And he called his son Esau. He was the firstborn. He said, "Son, why don't you go out there, hunt me the game, the venison that I love eating, and make some stew, and bring it, and as I eat, I will give you my last blessing." Isaac thought this was his last meal. He was going to bless his son. His wife, Isaac's wife, Rebekah, hears this. You see, this is where Jacob is getting it from his mom, right? So his wife hears this, that Esau is going to get the blessing, not her favorite, even though it's her son, not her favorite. He goes to Jacob. He says, "Look, your brother is about to get the blessing. Let's trick your father because his eyes are bad. He won't know who it is." And she says, "I will make the stew just like he wants it. I know how he likes it. I'll cook it. He would love it. But you go get..." Now Esau apparently was a pretty hairy man. She told Jacob to go get goat skin and put it on his arms, so that if his father wanted to feel him, he would think that it was Esau. So they conjured up this plan, and they tricked Isaac into thinking that Jacob was Esau. And not only he took his inheritance, he also took his blessing. Not only he took his birthright, he also took his blessing from him. So when Esau came back with the venison and presented it to his father, he said, "Who was that before you that came here?" You could imagine Esau flipped out. He said, "Isn't he rightfully called a sneak and a liar?" Because that's what Jacob meant. Slippery snake. a heel catcher, a deceiver. He said, I will kill him for this. And he wasn't kidding. So what happened is when Rebekah saw that this was going to happen, she ran to her son Jacob and said, look, your brother's going to kill you. There's nothing you can do. You have to run away. Go stay with my brother, Rebekah says, Laban, right, until his anger wears down, and then you can come back. Well, what Jacob didn't know was when he said goodbye to his mother, what he thought was only a few days was going to be 20 years. And what Jacob didn't know is when he came back, his mother was not going to be there anymore. She was going to die. Jacob didn't know a lot. So he's running for his life. He thinks he's going to be right back after a few days, maybe a few weeks. So he's running for his life, going to look for his uncle. And then it's night. He goes to a field where it's dark. He wants to sleep because he can't travel in the wilderness when it's really that at night. And he doesn't have anything with him. So he takes, there's a rock over there. He puts his head, uses that as a pillow, and goes to sleep. And in his dream, he sees this ladder coming down from heaven. Now, maybe you heard the phrase Jacob's ladder. It comes from here, from this dream. And in his dream, he sees angels coming in and going up. And then he hears the Lord. We are at Genesis 28, verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. That's where his uncle Laban is. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head. He lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching the heaven, and angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and God of Isaac. Notice something really big here. He didn't say, I am your God. He was the God of Abraham. He was the God of Isaac. Why wasn't God Jacob's God? Because Jacob wasn't following him. He wasn't surrendered to him. He knew God. He knew, you see, he sees God. Okay? And then later on, we're going to read, he's going to get scared. But God didn't say, I am your God. Does it sound like the scene Jesus is going to say to those in that last day? Those are going to say, hey, Lord Jesus, Lord Jesus. And he's going to say, I never knew you. I was never your God. Because you never surrendered to me. You never followed me. So, it's interesting. And God says, I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are laying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth and will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All the peoples of the earth will bless through you and your offspring. I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go. And I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done all I have promised you. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early next morning, Jacob took the stone which he had rested his head, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil over it on top of it. He called the place Bethel. Bethel means house of God. Then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me, and on this journey I'm taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I will return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God. Notice this part. And this stone that I have set up will be a pillar to God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give you 10. Now, at a cursory reading, you might think that Jacob is coming to faith here. Partially, not completely. Why? Because, as you can see, he says, if God gives me this, that, and the other, then I will follow him. This is idolatry. This is not true faith. This is using God as a good luck charm, not following him. If God gives me these things, then I will follow him. What does that mean? If he doesn't, you won't? If he doesn't give you these things, he's not God anymore? You see the fine point there? Don't miss it. But this is not lost on God. Now, for everyday occurrences, this is not considered faith. This is the beginning of his faith journey. Because he uses God as a good luck charm, because he doesn't rely on God in his decisions, his life will be full of tragedy and pain. He will suffer the consequences of all his stealing, lying, and cheating. He will pay for it until the end of his life. But it's not until the very end where he completely surrenders to God, he doesn't get to enjoy that peace with God. And I will go through that stuff really quickly. So he goes to his uncle's house. He sees his cousin, and he falls in love with her. Back then, they used to marry their cousins. I know, it's yucky. It's disgusting. But that's, believe it or not, up until 100 years ago, they still, in those regions, married their cousins. I mean, talk about dysfunction, but that's another topic. So, he sees his cousin. He falls in love with her. He says to his uncle, I will work for the dowry. They had to pay dowry for your daughter Rachel to marry her. Now, remember the principle. You reap what you sow. You know the saying, what goes around comes around. Right? Well, listen to the rest of the story. Laban is just like him. He's another snake, and a thief, and a liar, and a manipulator. He says, of course, marry Rachel. All you have to do is work for me for free for 7 years. At the end of 7 years, you can marry her. He's in love. She's beautiful. So 7 years seem like 7 days to him. He works and works and works hard, and he works as a shepherd, and the sheep are growing, the flocks are growing. God is blessing him, right, because of his promise to him, not because he deserved it, but God has a plan, because Jesus is going to come from the 12 sons of Israel. Jacob doesn't know that. He thinks he's got everything figured out. He's got his good luck charm, God in his pocket, right? And he's living life according to his understanding. He makes decisions according to his conniving ways and the worldly way of doing things. And he says, okay, fine. I'm going to have a beautiful wife. Life is good. I don't have to go back there right now. Anyway. So 7 years later, there's the wedding. And the next day morning he gets up. He sees that it wasn't Rachel that he ended up marrying. It was actually her older sister Leah, which was not so pretty, says the Bible. I mean, a lot of questions arise. Didn't you see her face at night? But they say that at that time the custom was the bride would have been veiled, and whatever the reason, he realizes it the next morning. But at that point it's too late. The marriage is consummated. There's nothing he could do about it. So he goes to his uncle. What have you done? You cheated. How does it taste? How does it feel, Jacob? He says, oh, well, it's our tradition, he says very smugly, that the older has to get married first. But if you want to marry Rachel, you can work another 7 years, and at the end of which you can marry her. And he does. He works for 7 more years, and then he marries Rachel. Wonderful. And then what happens? And then he's got kids. Kids are growing. But at this point, he's starting to think about his own future. Okay, I have all these kids. I have 2 wives. What am I going to do? I'm working for my uncle. I'm not making any money. So he starts cheating and conniving. He says, you know, Uncle, I need my own money, my own income. I don't want you to give me anything for free. I will continue working for you, but I will take only the sheep that are born with speckles and they don't look so good. I'll take them. You can keep the rest. So through God's blessing too, most of the sheep start coming out speckled. It comes to a point where his uncle's son says, hey, Dad, it seems like Jacob has more sheep than we do, and we're supposed to be his boss. How did this happen? So during those years, but Laban, he wasn't such an honorable guy either. He kept on changing his wages 10 times, the Bible says. He says, okay, this year I will give you 10 sheep, for instance, and then 2 months later he says, no, I'm going to give you 8. And then 2 months later he says, no, I'm going to give you 3. So I kept on changing and changing, so it was a really bad situation. And God appears to him. He says, okay, it's time for you to leave this place, go back to your father's house. But there's only one problem. His brother is waiting for him to kill him. He can't go back there. What is he going to do? He can't stay here with Laban because became a toxic working and living environment at this point. So what is he going to do? Again, he doesn't trust God that God will do what he said he will do. He relies on his own understanding and his trickery. He leaves in the middle of the night without saying anything to Laban, his uncle. God was telling you to leave. Why are you doing it sneakily? Do it the right way. Say, God told me, I'm taking my wife and my children, I'm leaving, whatever. So because he left like a thief in the middle of the night, now Laban is coming after him with his men to take his daughters, his grandchildren, and the flocks from him. So one end, he's got his brother looking to kill him. Behind him is Laban is coming after him. What is he to do? But realize, most of this trouble is his own making. Because he's not trusting God. He's trusting his own ability. He's trusting his own understanding. He's trusting his own wisdom. God had already told him to do this, that, and the other. Trust and surrender. Even though he had that encounter with the ladder, he still did not surrender to God. So, make a long story short, Laban catches up with him, but miraculously God touches him and says to Laban's heart and says, do not do anything bad to Jacob and your grandchildren. So God changes Laban's heart. And Laban goes and makes peace with him. They have a good feast and they break ways. And Jacob continues with his flocks and his children. But the problem still exists. His brother. What is he going to do? Because as far as he's concerned, his brother is going to kill him. So he schemes another plan. He says, what I'll do is I have so many sheep. I'll break our group into little, like 3-4 different groups. I will send my servants with like 400 sheep to appease him first. 500, actually. And then he does something really courageous. He says, I will send my wives and my children before me. If they get attacked, at least he can run away. This guy is a coward too. He's not a good guy. He's putting his wife and children in danger just so that he is not. So he does that, and he sends his servants, and servants come back with a message. He says, did you see my brother? Is he coming for me? He said, yes. And he's got 400 men with him. So he's scared. He's about to die. He knows it. He goes to sleep at night, but he can't sleep. He's wrestling. And then he sees this angel. And he starts wrestling with the angel. You see, he's a worldly person. Even though he knows God, even though he said he was going to follow him, he's not following him. But since God has a plan for him, God is not letting him go. Since God is going to bring Jesus from one of his children's line, since God's going to bring King David from one of his children's line, since one day his children is going to be known as the Israelites, God is not giving up on him. Guys, God doesn't give up on us either. Because he does have a plan for every single one of us. We are not all going to be nations like he is, but he has a plan for us, our wives, our husbands, our children, where we work. He has a specific plan. But we could do one of two things. We can be like Jacob. Just know God is there. Bless me, heal me, do this, bring me, give me. Use him as a good luck charm. Or we can totally surrender. If you want to save pain and suffering in your life, surrender to God. Because he will not give up on you. Oh, this is for believers. Okay? If you don't know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you don't care, this message is not for you. But if you're a Christian and you're walking with the Lord, or you say you want to, save yourself a lot of heartache, pain, and loss. Surrender to him. Do things his way. Because he will not give up on you. Even if it means to hurt you. Even if it means to take stuff from you. Even if it means to break your heart. Even if it means for you to lose some things. It is better to lose things for a short time, hurt for a short time on earth, to be forever lost in eternity. So Jacob doesn't know what's going to happen. He knows his brother is going to kill him. And then Genesis 32, verse 22. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives and 2 female servants and his 11 sons and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone. A man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was dislocated as he wrestled with the man. And then the man said, "Let me go, for it's daybreak." Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And the man asked him, "What is your name?" He said, "Jacob." He answered, "Your name will no longer be Jacob. You will no longer be a sneak and a thief and a liar and a manipulator, but Israel, which means Prince of God. Because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him. Let's not miss something here. When we read the translation in this way, we assume that Jacob won. No, he didn't. It wasn't like Jacob was holding on to the angel and saying, "I won't let you go unless you bless me." No, just the opposite. Because it was daybreak. Angel was going to leave him. And Jacob was begging him, "Please don't let me go without blessing me. I'm about to lose everything." This was the breaking point for Jacob. This was the point of faith, coming to faith for Jacob. Because he had finally what? Surrendered. Until then, it was conniving, planning, manipulating, cheating, lying, doing all those things. Trusting his own understanding. I'll do this, I'll say that, I'll go here. This is the only time, he said, "Please don't let me go." He had truly surrendered for the first time. And the angel, because of this, he says dislocated his, he became a cripple. He was crippled all his life. Why? You cannot go against God, do things your way, and not expect to be hurt. If you are a believer. If you are not a believer, you don't belong to God, you could do whatever you want. Eternity is different for you. But if you're a believer, He will not give up on you. He will not let you be your least possible version of yourself. He will not rest until you become the best possible version of yourself, even that means to hurt you or dislocate your hip or take something away from you. So that you realize he was a cripple for the rest of his life. Why? So that he remembered not to go back to his old ways of doing things. Something interesting happens there. He meets his brother. To his surprise, his brother doesn't want to kill him. He sees him. He hugs him. He's happy to see him. He sees all these, his gifts, his camels and cows and sheep. And he goes, what's all this? He says, these are my gift to you. He bows in front of his brother Esau. He says, brother, I'm rich. I don't need this stuff. Take it. Take it. I don't want your 500 sheep and this and that. He says, please take it. Please take it. So he takes it just to shut him up. Okay, fine. I'll take it. But he didn't have a problem with his brother. God had already prepared it. But again, when he completely surrendered, he went back to, one last time, he went back to his way. What did he do? His brother said, come with us. We'll go live in the valley, whatever. Thinking that he's smart. Again, Jacob. The old flesh shows up again. Not trusting God again. He tells his brother, yeah, I'll be there. You guys go ahead. He goes the opposite direction. But what happens? Again, he gets hurt. He goes into an area where he's not supposed to be. His daughter gets raped. And the guy that attacks her afterwards says, you know what? I'll do the honorable thing. Apparently he was the son of the local leader or the king or whatever. He goes to his dad. He says, Dad, this is what I did. I want to marry her. Let her just ask her from her dad to be my wife. So they go there. He says, this is what happened, but, we want them to be married and be husband and wife. And this and that. Jacob says, okay. And then his sons, very upset about what happened to their sister, right? Just like their father, said one thing and did something else. They said, okay, let them marry. They tricked the other village into being circumcised. They said, well, we can't give you our sister unless you're all circumcised, which was a lie. Right? So because of when you're circumcised, like for a few days, you're probably not the best version of yourself. You're not strong and powerful. And so they attacked all of them, his brothers, his sons, her brothers. And they killed all the young men. So now, this king is after him. Why? He's still trying to do things his own way. And all his conniving and cheating and manipulating is catching up with him because that's what his children learned from him. And they did the same thing. So finally he comes to the end of himself. He says, he cries out to God, broken. For the last time, he says, Lord, from this point on, what do you want me to do? He says, go to Bethel. That's the place he met him for the first time. That's the place he met God. Beloved, a lot of times, we have to go to the place where we met God. A lot of times, we have to go to that moment. And then something very interesting. He goes there. He goes to the rock. He prays to God. He makes it an altar. And from that point on, he calls that place El Bethel. Remember, Bethel meant house of God. But he wasn't going to the house of God. He went to El Bethel, God of the house of God. He didn't go to church. He went to God. Big difference. That's when he surrendered. He was serious because he told all his kids and his wives and all servants, he said, you will put away all the idols from you. They buried it over there. He said, change your clothes. Dress like a godly person. Change your lives. And then he finally committed his life. And that's when finally he had peace and true prosperity in his life. Now, I went too long by at least 13 minutes. But the lesson here, guys, for all of us, unless we surrender for real, not to use God as a blessing source, not to use Him as a good luck charm, not so that we get this and that, get that, but unless we go to the God of the house of God, have that relationship with Him, not say to Him, if you give me this and that, I will follow you, but go to Him and say, God, you're God, I am not, I will follow you, let your will be done. When you say that, He will change your life in a way that you yourself cannot imagine. But until that point, if you're a professing believer, He will not let you go. You will wrestle with Him, you will fight with Him, and He will hurt you. One last illustration, I'm done. In the old days, shepherds would take a bad sheep, the ones that would constantly run away, go to the cliffs, and they're going to die, right? Or they're going to be eaten by lions, whatever. They would take those sheep. They would not listen, and they wouldn't stay next to Him. They would take them and break one of their legs. What happened? They couldn't run away anymore. But during that time, the shepherd would take that little sheep, put it around his neck, and carry her until that lamb healed. But that lamb never left him again. Never went into danger again. Never went to the cliffs again. Never went to be almost eaten by the lions again. And God does that to us. Sometimes He breaks one of our legs just to get our attention. So the moral of the story, in the final analysis, what are we learning? Unless we completely surrender. Not God, if you do this and that and the other, but completely surrender because of His love and because of who He is and who we are not, we will never, never have the full blessing He has for us. How I pray this for all of us, including me, that we would completely surrender. God bless you.